I'm currently in the process of rewriting my next novel. So what I want to share with you today are my 6 powerful rewriting steps. So let's take a look at what those 6 steps are.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Julie Amante channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julie Amante. I'm a women's fiction author, and I also come to you on Friday to give you some writing tips to help you with your book. Okay, the very first thing I do is sort of that big picture look at my story. I will go through and read the story from start to finish, and I'm looking at the big things. So for example, is it flowing well? Does it flow well from scene to scene, chapter to chapter? Does it make some big jumps where I need to go back and rewrite or add scenes or maybe take some scenes out that I thought were important at the very beginning, but as I go through, I realize that they're not needed. So I look at everything. I look at the pacing, I look at the structure, I look at the chapter lengths to see, sometimes I'll have a 20-page chapter, but then I'll have a 7-page chapter following it or before it, and I need to, you can do that. You can definitely have a longer chapter if there's a lot of action or a lot of things that need to happen in that chapter, and the reader will be okay with that. They do not, in my opinion, have to be the same length. Each chapter can be slightly different, but if it is 20 in one chapter and 7 in another, that's not slightly, that's a big change. So is there a place in those 20 pages that I can go back and maybe move those scenes over somewhere? Does it have to be, does that chapter have to be 20 pages long? Again, this is just kind of an extreme example. Most of my chapters don't look like that, but sometimes, they can, or sometimes I just get excited and I forget to put a chapter break in there. So during this big picture, I'm looking at the structure, I'm looking at the pacing, I'm looking at the flow to make sure that the novel just is flowing well, right? It's working from chapter to chapter, scene to scene. Okay, then I go back, and this is step 2. So step 1, I am going through the entire novel. Okay, so I'm going through the whole thing. Second pass through, I'm going back to the beginning of the book, and I'm looking at something different now. So now I'm looking at my details. I tend to be, everybody's slightly different. My weakness tends to be description. I don't add enough descriptions. I don't add enough details, and I know I should. But as I'm writing that, the details seem to not matter to me. I just want to go through the plot, right? I just want to, like, what happens next and what happens next. I do dialogue, I think, very well. I think I have an ear for that, and I actually let my dialogue almost take me through the novel. There's plenty of dialogue. I almost never really have to fix the dialogue. I do have to sometimes take some away, or add dialogue tags or some things like that. But mostly what I focus on during that second pass is adding details. I want to make sure that I'm giving specific details of where the character is, if they're crossing the street, what's the name of the street, if they're if they're doing, I just want to make sure that all of that in there. If I'm talking about they're outside, well, what's the scene like? Is it cold? What time of the year is it? I'll add all those details in there because those details are important, and it makes the reader feel like they're there with the character. And again, for me, I tend to leave a lot of that out of that first draft, right? So I need to go back now that my first draft flows well, or my second draft, this would be my third draft, right? So my first draft, I've got all the information down. The second draft, I got the flow down and the structure, and all of that looks good. This third draft is very important for me because I do need to add more of those details, and it becomes a richer story because of those details that I'm adding. Okay, the next 2 steps, I do them together. They can definitely be 2 separate steps. I look at language to make sure that it is specific and essential. Okay, what does that mean? When I'm describing something, my verbs need to be very specific. So instead of saying that the character walked into a room, I want to be specific of exactly what she did, and probably take that out because it's too generic, right? And it's not interesting enough. So I go through the language and I make sure that the language is specific. Again, going back to those details, right? But this time it's the whole thing. It's all the language. It's my verbs. It's my nouns. Making sure that they are specific. The essential part is, do I even need those? So going through each sentence and going through each, mostly it's at the sentence level instead of the paragraph level. But I go through the sentences and I say, do I really need this? Is this essential? Does the reader need to know this? Am I just giving, now that I've added details, did I add details I don't really need? Sometimes I can do that together. Okay, so these, I'm giving you specific steps, but sometimes I will notice as I'm going through the second draft that, oh, okay, I'm adding specific details, but honestly, I don't really need this at all, so I'm going to take it out. So sometimes I do that, right? It kind of flows, it blends together, right? Step 2, step 3. But I go through this now and I say, okay, is this essential? Is the language essential? Is it wordy? Am I just adding too many words that I don't need? So I want it to be as concise as possible, but as detailed as possible. So the details are the things that the reader really needs, but the wordiness is, can I change that? Can I cut it down? Can I make it each word work, basically? Okay, so some people will just go through and make this 2 steps, looking at language, and then me, I just do it both at the same time. So I'm going to read you actually a short paragraph that I wrote into my current novel. And again, this is one that I'm writing now, so it's not out yet. But I ended up changing it completely. So even when I wrote this, I was changing it slightly, and I ended up changing it completely and creating a scene out of it, because I thought I needed more than what just this said. But this is how I started. Okay, so this is what it said. I started the course that Victoria paid for. I studied and read through the material and state regulations. She came over a couple of times to test me, and her questions were helpful. I took notes. She was right about needing more than 1 week, but it wasn't that difficult. Okay, so what does this paragraph say? It really says nothing, right? So it needs to be more specific. What course did Victoria pay for? What reading materials did she give him? Do they matter? Is this essential for the comprehension of the story? So like I said, I did rewrite this. So I rewrote it like this, which was better, but I still decided that it wasn't good enough. I really needed a different kind of scene. So I rewrote it. I'll read it so that you can kind of see what it sounds like when it's rewritten, which again is better, but I still did not keep this. Okay, so this is how I rewrote it. Although this California weekend promised to be warm and perfect for laying by the pool with a cold beer, I spread my books and handwritten notes on my coffee table along with a cup of coffee. I opened the book on property and casualty principles and settled on my couch to absorb the information. So it's just, now it's more specific. We know what he's looking at. We know what he's doing. We know where he's sitting. So again, it's more specific. I'm not even talking yet about what she gave him and all of that. So we want to change the writing so that it is very detailed, it is very specific, and it helps the reader to see what's happening rather than just tell them a bunch of generic things that means nothing, right, to the reader. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. The next step, so step number 5, is I go to my opening and closing. So I'm not only going to the opening and closings of the novel, so I'm not going just to page, chapter 1 and then the last chapter. I'm going to the opening and closings of at least every chapter, sometimes every scene, though honestly I don't do that as much as I should. I probably should go through every scene, but I don't. But I do for every chapter. So what your opening is supposed to do, of course, is hook the reader, right? And what the closing does is it wraps up whatever it is that was happening. But it doesn't just wrap it up and then the reader is happily closing your book at the end of the chapter, right? What we need is also a hook at the end of that chapter. So we have a hook at the beginning and we also have a hook at the end. The beginning also sometimes will answer the hook from the previous chapter. So if you left the chapter on sort of a cliffhanger, what's going to happen in the next chapter is you're going to give your reader kind of the answer to that cliffhanger, right? You're going to resolve whatever is happening very quickly and then move on. So each chapter is building on a new problem, a new thing that's happening, or it's continuing the problem, right? But there's a hook at the end that makes the reader want to go on to the next chapter. Okay, and it doesn't mean that every chapter, has to be amazing. It has to have this wonderful ending. You know, not all of them do, but it needs to be, it needs to have enough tension, it needs to have enough interest, right? So that you're ending the chapter with some kind of question that the reader then gets the answer to that question in the next chapter. It makes them want to go on to the next chapter. So I go through each one of my chapters and I make sure that at least the ending is posing some kind of question, something that the reader might want to know, and that they want to continue on to the next chapter to find out the answer. Okay, so that's the 5th step. So now I've gone through my whole novel 5 times, right? I've gone through the whole thing. At this point, I'm getting tired of my book. But then the last time, the 6th step is to go through and look for typos and look for grammatical errors and look for that. I'm not that good at that. I go through it as much as I can, and then it goes to an editor, okay? But I do my best to find things that that could be wrong. I find a lot of them. I find words that I actually missed. I don't know if this is happening to me now that I'm a little older, but I'll miss, like, it'll be missing. You know, I won't have that word in there. Or words, you know, I think it's just the speed of the typing or my brain that is not making the connection to my fingers. I don't know what it is, but I end up missing words that I need to put in there. There could be typos. There could be just the sentence that I don't like the way I wrote it, or that I don't like the way it flows grammatically, you know. So I go back and I fix that. And once I'm done with that, like I said, it does go to an editor. So at this point, it should be pretty good, right? It should flow well. You know, the content is all there because I made sure of that during that very first time that I went through it, where I'm looking at the chapters and the flow and the content. Am I missing something? Do I need to add scenes? I went through all that. I went through adding my details. I went through checking to make sure that that the language is appropriate and good, and it's all needed, and I don't have any extra sentences or words that I can get rid of. And I've looked at the grammatical spelling and typos and all that. So hopefully by now my novel is as good as it's going to get. So I don't go through it any more than that, because at this point I'm trusting that I did my job, right? That I did everything, and it needs to go out to an editor. Now, when I was working you know, with a publisher, a traditional publisher, I would send it to my editor, and then they would make their own changes. So for whatever reason, they didn't like certain scenes, or they wanted things changed, they wanted something added, they would have their own input into my book to make it better. And so at that point, it would come back to me, and I would address the issues that my editor had. And sometimes there were things I just didn't see, I didn't notice, or I didn't you know, it just escaped me because I'm too close to the novel, which is why it's nice having an editor to do, you know, to look at it for you. Now that I'm working on it on my own, I'm trusting that the content is good and the book is flowing well. So the editor that I hire is looking at is line editing, is looking at somewhat, you know, the flow and structure of it, but mostly is looking at it line by line, making sure that again that the words are all necessary, that I'm not being repetitive, that you know, the grammar, the spelling, all of that is correct. So that's my the way that I do my rewriting, and it helps. And so hopefully, if it helps you, you know, you can look at it. I'm also going to attach a link to my blog where I have it all written, because sometimes listening to it and reading it is much different, and I like to read through, especially if there are certain steps that I need to follow. So I hope this has been helpful. If it has, please hit that like and the share button, subscribe, so that you can be notified next time that I post another video, which will be next Friday, but you want to be reminded. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next week.